Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Rubicon podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the flavor of the last 2 days, which is multimodal AI and everything launched by OpenAI and Google. So, Govind and Vishwesh, what did you both think of the launches?
I thought it was pretty exciting. I think there's like a subset of people on Twitter who believe that the fact that OpenAI has chosen to spend time sort of improving UX in some regard is evidence that like scaling laws are starting to plateau. I think that's nonsense. I think they have a lot of interesting goodies waiting that they don't really care to release because they want more training data, and this is an insane opportunity to collect a lot of it. I think I'm reasonably scared because I don't know if you guys have heard the voice, but it's not. It's like it's of a certain persuasion that I think is also very purposeful and is a good way to at least attempt to kill character AI in some sense.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that stood out to me, right? So if we just consider, the GPT-4o and compare that against like Project Astra, which is what like kind of Google had. I think the what I found that was interesting was like really OpenAI was building kind of the exact setup for launching a producty setup rather than more of like what Project Astra was. And I think the key difference that I really kind of like honed in on was like Google was using video and OpenAI wasn't using video. And that is, it kind of sounds like as if,
Wait, wait,
these
wait,
are
what do you mean
these
OpenAI
aren't
wasn't
kind of
using?
massively different.
What do you
So,
mean OpenAI
so
wasn't using?
as I understand it right now, OpenAI's GPT-4o doesn't use video, so they just kind of
It
like
does.
take snapshots and
No, no, no.
send
So
images. So
no, no,
it's not natively processing video.
I'm fairly certain they're taking like they're doing. It's fully video. You can do video understanding.
I'm not sure about that. We can also like fact check this later. But like my understanding was, so if you assume for a second that they weren't using video, right? Which I think as soon as you start using video, you tend to have a lot more latency because actually pushing that many frames as well as the audio along with it will end up
Yeah,
making the models a lot slower.
any text, audio, image, and video.
For GPT-4o,
Yeah.
okay, I'm probably wrong then. But I'd initially read that they weren't kind of using video, which is why I was kind of surprised with the difference in latency between like GPT-4 versus Project
Okay.
Astra. Because when I looked at Google's setup today, it was slower, right? Like I mean, it I don't think it was just me when I was like looking at the video setups between the two models. It felt like as if Google setup was slower. And I wouldn't assume that, it's network or any of those things. I would just assume that, it's because they're using different data streams, basically. And so you
I,
kind of have much more tokens in
I
video in one versus the other.
I think the answer to that is OpenAI just has built their own. I think suspicion is that OpenAI has built their own like neural like codec for more efficiently streaming video.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
maybe the
And
model can sort of pay better attention or less attention to some parts or other.
I think I think kind of more broader picture, I agree with you both in the sense that it felt like OpenAI was going more for like a producty launch versus like more research focus, which has been like the flavor some of the other times. But it feels like the companion concept that a lot of people have spoken about, which is what character does and which kind of all of these other products trend to do, which is somebody or like this smart assistant or smart almost like an alter ego that you can take with you that actually understands video and and like audio and text and kind of each and everything and does things in a reliable fashion with very low latency was the aim. And I think they did I think the demos were a great attempt at that. Now I think that's kind of on the OpenAI side of things. And then like I think what was most interesting to me about the Google setup was the fact that they focused a lot on agents. So they came out with like these email agents, and they came out with where you can go to refunds and then email summarizations and all of that stuff. And that was interesting because I know we touched on the agents topic in the last episode. And of course, we have probably tens of agent companies, everything from consumer to enterprise to that are building. And this begs the question, which is what will happen to these agent companies in the future as Google, which has massive distribution, and OpenAI and potentially Meta and others start building these sort of agents, what the future of these companies will look like, given agents are defined by how much great reliable data do you have to go train these agents, and of course like they have the distribution plus the data to go train these models and the capital to go do it. So I think those are kind of the two things that I took away from the two from some of the from the two announcements.
I think I think like general consumer agents, I think it's going to be tough to compete with Google, and presumably if that the Apple ChatGPT collaboration does indeed occur, that's going to be reasonably tricky. I think there's still like huge opportunities for domain specific agents, or like agents that attempt to do things that are not within training data. Like I don't know how far in context learning can take you, and I imagine can take you pretty far, but I think also there's a point at which you do really want improvement, and you want to get from like 4 nines of reliability to 5 nines of reliability. I don't think you can get that with just like purely closed source models. Even if you can do really really long context in context, like many shot in context learning and so on. I don't think that'll get you as far as at some point saying, okay, I'm going to train my own, I'm going to fine tune my own model, do some RLHF, do this, do that. And so
Yeah.
I think like really, really high value use cases that are really specific will continue to thrive. I think general agent companies is going to be trickier.
Yeah. And I think on the enterprise side, yeah, like you mentioned, like most of these are targeted to the consumer. Also, most of these companies, like the reason they're able to build these really great agents is because they have like access to the APIs, and like these agents are not actually like going on the browser and like figuring out what the website looks like, where to click and do all of that stuff. So they just have much higher reliability. But these are of course like domain specific. So like Google is building it for Gmail and like the basically like the Google apps, and then Meta is going to do it for WhatsApp and like the family of apps there. But like there is definitely like an opportunity for like the enterprise across different applications and what that would look like. And then I know, Wish, you work with some amount of like image and video models. On the OpenAI side of things and like 4o, how did you view that conversation and like and the model there? Because like video understanding and intelligence has of course been like a something that a lot of people have been trying to solve. So would love your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, before VLR, I'd worked on a couple of projects that involved kind of like stitching videos together to produce images. So it's something uh, that's definitely very interesting. Video has its own set of like very kind of unique challenges associated with it. I think this kind of two pieces there. One is um, video has this weird problem of like kind of blurring that exists like across frames. Um, and in general, it's like, you can actually just sample videos at different rates because you mostly don't care about a lot of the information that exists in any single frame of video, right? And I think that the setups that they have, like actually compressing the information that exists in any general form of video is like the key problem to solve. And so, you're probably going to see more and more of that kind of go onto chips once these models actually get good enough, I feel, right? So you'd have a lot of the kind of like core processing, which is like very intense, very parallel, just shifted all the way onto chips. Apple is like Apple and Google are both in great places to kind of work on that, and so thus it basically becomes kind of like we come back to the phone problem again, right?
And I think Apple has in the past been working on some of this stuff like H264, 265. They have their own custom codecs for doing video decoding, that encoding and decoding, that I think uh, will continue to be advanced and improved.
Yeah.
I mean,
Also,
one,
why is video understanding even important, right? Like, I think
yeah.
that is something interesting to talk about because, like, I mean, when you think about like in the healthcare use case, which is like, let's say for radiology to actually like understand, like for at least from an image perspective, understanding X-rays, or from like a video understanding perspective, it could be for defense, national security use cases, or for let's say drones or anything else of that sort. This is of course like that is the reason this is like such an important problem and like until now hasn't been solved. And along with that, it's also like as humans, one of the core ways in which we understand is also through like the way we see the world, which is not in images but is in like this like live stream video, and like is in this exhaust, and like the hope is that like we can build these exhaustive models that are experts and not as like and are not as good as humans, because of course why would we like to build an average agent like we talked about in the first episode. So that's why like this video problem is contentious and important, and lots of money is being poured into it.
And I think I think in some capacity, Google has sort of raised, has attempted to contribute to raising that bar. I don't know if you guys saw they released like Pali Gemma or something like that, which I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
my understanding is some kind of vision language model, right? And
Hmm.
so like the lava exists and uh, cog VLM exists and so on. And I'm glad Google is like throwing their hat in the game. I think it's like only a small jump from like image understanding to video understanding. I think obviously it's like a lot tougher to do video understanding at scale. I think it's not. I think it's really useful to be able to have like models that you can run on the edge that can understand video. Because like who's gonna run like 100 billion parameter model to pilot a drone, because you're gonna get shot down because latency.
Yeah, I think the video problem as well. Like you can only get to video, I feel like, from in terms of the kind of history of it, you only get to it from images because I like for me the biggest problem is, okay, how do you construct the data set that you're actually using? Because you need to, if you want to build a multimodal setup, you need a video and you need it to be annotated in some form with text which tells you what is happening in each of the different frames of video. And you simplify that by saying, okay, here's one image, tell me what's happening in the image. And first you solve that problem, then you do it densely for a lot of different frames of video. And Google, of course, with YouTube has like this problem solved, right? And I'm not exactly sure where OpenAI's data is coming from, probably
YouTube.
scraping a bunch of YouTube, right? So, um, I mean, you kind of have that problem kind of set up mostly in a manner where Google has the only kind of like nice data set over here. And I don't know who else actually has like a data set that's comparable. You probably have some version of it in Instagram and TikTok, but I think that they are different, right?
But I
No,
think
I think
it's
one thing I think someone at Meta at Fair mentioned that they trained their latest image generation or like GIF generation model on like Instagram and Facebook data, so it is
Yeah.
decently useful.
Yeah, I think I think the chief product officer mentioned it at like one of these recent events that like they train on everything basically that's like public data that like people share publicly. They train on that and not on like personal messages or anything else of that sort, which is still like a
Oh, not-
massive corpus basically.
yeah. Well, I think what I'm really excited about is like the full multimodality of instead of sort of like training separate. Instead of like training encoders and decoders separately and like projecting from one embedding space onto the other the way that we have been for the last couple of years. Good to see that OpenAI is like successfully productized some of the research that people have been thinking about for a few years now but haven't really scaled up in any real sense. I think I think 4o is really just like the beginning of a significantly larger trend. But I also don't think the gap between like it took a year, maybe year or so for open source to catch up or other companies to catch up with GPT-4 level performance. I think 4o performance, I think Meta is significantly closer to now, in the sense that like I think maybe 6 months tops before you get to some equivalence in open source, which is actually fantastic. And
Yeah.
implications, you know.
Yeah, and we've of course like seen like less in video but more in the audio stack, that there are a handful of companies in the, of course, like they're building these foundation models for audio, and then there are a lot that are building kind of on the application layer, which are more vertical specific, like let's say like basically a call basically for healthcare or for automotive or anything else of that sort. And I think like it's it's really hard to be companies that are building these audio foundation models, just because like OpenAI, it feels like, has come out with such a great model, and their cost is just decreasing pretty drastically. In terms of like it'll be interesting to see where those companies go from here.
I think the one thing that OpenAI will never offer that these companies have an edge over is voice cloning.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like hazardous for OpenAI to venture into that, even though they'll do a fantastic job at it. Uh, So like 11 labs at all, I think are in some capacity safe for now.
Yeah.
But I think the main reason for that again is that if you want to start some like audio foundation model startup, right? Like your data set is just I'm just a little bit better at scraping the web at the start. And scraping the web is like, in general, if you're OpenAI, that's probably what you need to like first fix. And then you have like the setup that where you kind of like farm data collection out to like MTurk and a lot of different places to be able to collect larger and larger sources of data. And so you could argue that for very, very kind of like niche boutique sources of data, then those companies continue to exist in some form where they basically take an open source model, fine tune it on their data, and thus they have like some niche service. But like because of the fact that the data itself is niche, you can also assume that the market cap of such a company is also going to be niche, right? And so you kind of have that recursive problem. And any data that currently is worth something, like the biggest companies in the world, like or at least the three, like the two ones that are biggest from ad revenue perspective, have most of their have a lot of data facing the web, right? And so you kind of and all of the data is scrapable. I mean, you can assume, sure, you can argue that most of Facebook's actual kind of like importance is in the actual social graph that it has, and that is not kind of like that easily accessible. But even that is kind of like to some degree accessible in terms of like follower lists and things like that, which you just go into like Instagram, you can like pull that information. It's painful, but it's possible.
Yeah, and with open source, like go inside, catching up this closely, I think all three of us are on the same page that like, of course, like the hyperscalers and these large tech companies like Meta, Google, and OpenAI as well, probably a handful of other players are going to be the ones that are going to be left in the foundation model game. But when it comes to like verticalizing the software, let's say fine tuning it on like domain specific data and then verticalizing the solution and like then going for more of a land grab, let's say in healthcare or any of these other spaces, I think there are like still, I believe, many multi-billion dollar companies to be made, just given how much people are spending on call centers or how much time nurses are spending on answering or like booking appointments or anything else of that sort.
I fully agree.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's so many humans who do so many different jobs, and it's so difficult to get any new system to integrate well with any existing system that like just if you just describe that problem, there's like billions and billions to be made in just kind of ensuring that that extension process happens with any new technology. And so that gets, and I think it's actually it was under discussed what Sam had written in the blog post he posted, right? Where previously he's been talking about for like the last at least 5 years. It's always been we're going to build AGI. We'll ask AGI what product it wants us to build to make a ton of money, and we'll just build that. And now he's talking about how we'll build AGI, but it doesn't look like as if AGI like we're going to build any of the products around it, because that we're just going to sell like the API, and then we'll probably kind of make do with that. Which I was actually very surprised he's coming out and saying that now. It kind of felt to me like kind of an admission of defeat or acceptance of sorts in
I
terms
mean,
of the position that they're in. And I don't know if you guys had different reads about that.
I mean, I don't know if I'd agree that it's like an admission of defeat so much as uh, you know, don't run for your lives just yet. In the sense that I think it is more of a simple platitude you say to assure people that there are still businesses to be built. There are still things you can do. When in truth, unless you're willing to build these like highly verticalized businesses, rising tide lifts all boats. These foundation models are going to get better and better and better. And everyone, what does everyone else do? What is not apparent, right? So you tell them, of course, we're not going to build all the products. You guys will build all the products. But I think again, competition is for losers, and like everyone's going to be competing away. So I
Yeah.
think a post AGI world is sort of dystopian. But like pre AGI, it fully makes sense that like they don't have all the time in the world to go build all the product, right? And so like
I
other
think it's
people,
also like an optics thing, right? Like
yeah, it's an
because
optics thing more than anything else.
I think OpenAI in the last 6 months, also with like I think it was publicly announced that Ilya is leaving, and the
Yeah.
whole thing. I think they've gone through a lot of changes in the last 6 months with the board, with Sam, and all of that stuff. And I think there is an understanding that it's I see it less as an acceptance of defeat, but more of an acceptance of, or some sort of an acceptance of reality in terms of like what the outward narrative might want to be. Just because it's a little bit hard when uh, the mission is to build AGI, but you of course have to like take out these products and operate as a company and raise large sums of capital. I think that is like we always thought that there was going to be some sort of middle ground that they would reach, and I think statements like these are subtle ways of nudging the right folks in that direction.
Yeah, and I don't even think it's true necessarily, right? That like they're just sitting back and letting other people build applications, right? Like if the rumors are to be believed, OpenAI will release some search application, right? Some search engine. They work closely with legal AI startups to do XYZ things. They do all these things. They have a really they have a serious hand in the applications that are being built.
Yeah, I think there's like two other kind of questions that I think are interesting, right? One is like the combination of like kind of Ilya, Jan Leakey, like all of the folks who are kind of associated with kind of super alignment, all of them
Mm.
leaving. So that's kind of like one set of things that we probably should talk about a little bit. I think the I think the second piece is probably associated with that, which is like the kind of like plateau question, and I'll kind of tee it up in a slightly different manner, right? I think one of the things that if you kind of look at the current way a lot of these models are trained, yes, it's kind of a massive systems problem. But if you kind of align that with um, maybe internet or with like kind of semiconductors, right? Like it's very difficult to explain to the average person what it means to actually make that technology work. And I think that when you compare it to what kind of occurs in most of these networks, right? Like a transformer's beauty is its simplicity, right? And the beauty of like the multimodal setup, yes, there's kind of like funky things going on the inside, but those are like mostly just optimizations. It just helps you train the model a little bit better, right? But mostly the thing is, just take whatever data you have, pump it into this model that's relatively simple, just make it pretty big, and just ensure that things don't die and ensure the gradients flow, right? And I think that the one of the things that makes me kind of both kind of like very happy that such a simple idea kind of like works so well, but also skeptical that that there is like kind of this massive moat that exists within the technology is the simplicity of this entire setup, right? And that kind of tees also into the question of like one like scale, like as you continue to scale, would you end up seeing kind of like massive jumps in terms of performance? I'm like less certain. I'm sure the GPT-5 is going to be good, right? I'm not saying it's not going to be a jump above GPT-4, but the kind of jump that you saw from 2 to 3 and expecting the same jump, I don't think that's what the jump from 3 to 4 really was. Whether 4 to 5 is going to be another massive jump, and whether you can go from 5 to 6 over the course of like the next 3 years, I'm like a little bit more kind of less scaling pulled as I see some of these demos. And you did kind of like talk about this at the start, Govind. So I don't want to relitigate that, but I'm just curious if you still do kind of like feel that there is like this massive moat in what I think there's a hyperscaler moat, which is like you actually need enough capital to throw at like collecting the GPUs and collecting the data and having people to do that. But like in any other kind of in any of these other kind of like very difficult transformations, like if you look at semiconductors, it's actually really hard to build something like that, right? And perhaps you can make the argument that this is also very hard, but I'm not sure that I buy it as easily.
So, like to clarify, would you argue that I don't know, say like ASML or something, uh, has a moat? Are you saying that the kind of moat that ASML has is a real moat, whereas like the OpenAI moat is less of a moat and more of a resource allocation problem? Is that the argument?
Uh,
But-
Kind of. I mean, I think that if you
Oh,
did, I think ASML is a good example of something that basically no one else can build in the world, right? And no one
is
can.
is it my question is that more of a no one else can build, or that no one else wants to build, or like what do you think is why is it that no one else can build?
So I so let's take the second question first, right? If you consider that no one else wants to build, right? I think that the no one else wants to build doesn't seem to me to be right because it's worth like 200 billion, couple of 100 billion, right? So it's like not nothing, right? In one sense. So I would suspect that if it was kind of not that hard to build, someone would build it. But the other sense is also, I think the investment is over very, very long time horizons, and the technology is just like kind of insanely hard to for anyone to understand. And it's more like when you're sitting at ASML, it's mostly a logistics problem with like all of the suppliers. And you can argue that Apple's is also kind of a logistics problem with all of the different suppliers they have and ensuring they put it all together because most hardware startups don't work like Tesla, right? They like a lot of places basically have decided that trying to build everything is too hard. Let someone else do all of the other different hard pieces, and we'll just put it all together and ensure we can define the specifications correctly. And Tesla decided to go back to the old Ford way of just basically we'll do everything in house, right? But
I think,
uh, yeah,
So wait, so
no,
what was
I,
your point?
yeah.
What were you getting to?
so I'm saying that so on the one hand I don't think it's I think that that's a real mode, right? I think that's like a true technology mode, like
Wait,
if
do
someone
you think
else just wanted to
competition?
do it.
I mean, I think the opportunity in LLMs is in building AGI is like so much. Like the opportunity is so much larger than like ASML or TSMC or Nvidia or Intel, right? That like of course you're gonna have these like highly capitalized players that one already have the data going after this problem, right? Because I mean it's not you don't just see like randos off the street deciding to go build build AGI, right? It's people who already have one of the two, or if not both of the two, right? They already have data and they already have compute. So now it's just a matter of like human capital allocation, right?
Yeah,
If
and
you
I
had
think,
if you had two of three steps, would you not at least take a shot on goal?
yeah, and I
That
think that is the big
sorry,
thing, right? Like, no, just to happen here, I think that is the big thing, which is like it feels like with Mistral and others coming in that like the understanding is if you have enough capital, you can probably get the compute, you can probably get the data, and if you know how to train a model, then guess what? Like you can do it too, and the opportunity is big enough that like there can be there are all these players and like as an investor, I see probably every week I see a new company that wants to go build a foundation model because the view is that the way OpenAI is built or Anthropic is built and all these other models are built, like fundamentally the fundamentals are kind of built in a very different way, and thus like they won't get to super high reliability or cost won't scale as well or something else of that sort. So I think the opportunity is big enough where like versus like a AS, I mean the ASML opportunity is big enough too. But I think the reason a lot of people are going at it is because it feels more commoditized uh, than ASML, where like it's not gonna take years and years to go build up this supply chain and logistics and optimize it and do and basically get these customers who are these massive customers like TSMC and others. And also like these markets are more oligopolies and move a lot slower, and customers do too. Whereas like in
Mhm.
OpenAI's case and in the models case, like we see people shifting across models like super easily and super quickly. And I think that is the aspect which is like the market's very agile, and it feels like if you have the right resources, you can actually scale up really fast. Like of course, like OpenAI has this huge advantage, but still like relatively fast versus like some of the other legacy incumbent companies and industries.
I fully agree. I think you hit the nail on the head in the fact that like the markets are more agile. Two, who are you going to sell to if you build an ASML competitor? Say the same like 10 people that ASML is selling to. That's tough. That's really tough. But like but when you're selling AGI, you can sell it to literally anyone in the whole world, right? Huge opportunity.
No, but see, I think that, and I think Dwarkesh has probably made this point before me, right? But all your points are stuff that I agree with. And the problem is, I agree with it and I take it in a different direction, right? Now, if you assume that it's a commodity, right, treat it like oil. Now, the biggest, like a lot of the biggest companies in the world were basically like branched off of Standard Oil, right? And Standard Oil was just dealing with a commodity. And all they said was, this commodity is like so variable across different places. Let's standardize it and let's sell it to everyone. And the reason why it became this incredibly profitable thing was obviously they were doing so many other things on like each of the different stages of like access, refining, and then distribution, right? But like at the start, the reason why they were able to win was because they they had like a crazy dude called John Rockefeller who basically ran a crazy monopoly for an extraordinary period of time, where they needed to start antitrust just to take him down, right? Now, you've got like the same thing that kind of hits Gates, etc. But I suspect the only way that such a setup works for AGI is that models are commodities, and thus you need to construct a monopoly that allows you to standardize everything, drive the cost down like crazy, and then at some point the government says, no, this is not happening, and then someone comes in and breaks up such a company, right? Now, I think that the problem is that because Microsoft has kind of gone through that one round in the form of like, the Windows system, the operating system, right? I think that, one of the reasons why perhaps Apple doesn't want to give, the deal to Google for kind of putting Gemini into the iPhone is because it's just going to become more difficult from potentially a monopoly, kind of an antitrust perspective from the FTC, right? So, I feel like I come back to, the AI is like kind of oil in some sense, or AGI is probably like oil in some sense. And thus, perhaps what people realize is, perhaps the only way to kind of solve this problem is to be a monopoly. And I don't really know how you build a monopoly when everyone is trying to compete over here. And like you've got all the hyperscalers sitting around trying to compete with each other, and you've got a bunch of VC money funding the rest of the folks who are also trying to compete. It just doesn't seem kind of like all that
I,
clear to
I
me.
I don't know if I agree with that AGI aspect, just because it feels like out of like all the players, like OpenAI is kind of the most targeted in saying like we're building AGI. Everybody else sort of mentions it, but that's not like the core focus. And I think the reason for that is that in the journey to AGI, which is potentially going to take many years and is going to take a long time, there are like billions, if not trillions of dollars to go get captured. And I think that is what the market is going after, which is, yes, like in the oil case as well, like it is a commodity right now, but in the process of actually commoditizing it, like so many companies made so much money that it didn't really matter. Like at the end of it, like at least probably till the end of the next couple of decades, everybody's happy and probably has very very juicy profits. So I think that is the reason like most people are still going after this like commoditized market, because in the process to AGI they can still do all the things they want to do.
I mean, the other thing here is like I don't know if I necessarily agree that AGI will be a commodity. I think like run of the mill foundation model X is going to be a commodity, right? I think building frontier models requires, as we've seen, a depth of capabilities and competence and institutional knowledge that just most companies don't have, right? And
But but
so
they, but they will have it over a period of time, right? I
over
just
a period, I
so
mean,
so
like
so
depends on
one
how
is one
long.
is that point. But the other point that I just want to kind of like briefly mention is, so like OpenAI is not the first company that said they wanted to build AGI. DeepMind was. DeepMind was the AGI company. DeepMind is the AGI company, right? OpenAI is more of the AGI is a better product to sell people kind of company, and they've always felt like more of a product company, and DeepMind is more of the research company, right? And and now kind of Anthropic sitting around is kind of like the weird stepbrother that got kicked out of the house from OpenAI, right? And I'm not sure kind of like any of the other folks are even all that relevant over here. So you kind of only have three people that you need to talk about. You're talking about AGI per se right now. Perhaps you have to throw like Meta in right now with Llama, but yeah.
I mean, I think the difference here is that some random Texan farmer, can accidentally stumble across an oil well in my 20,000 acres, and I need to find a way to make use of that. And some guy's willing to give me money for that, right? That's different from here are three companies that are actively trying to go after AGI, and maybe four, and like everyone else doesn't really know what's going on. And again, like our eyes are complete, no eyes on the ground in China. So assume there's like another like four players geopolitically that exist. Like it had like 10 people in the world are going after this. Not the same thing as I trip over.
Well, but I'll tell you the difference here, right? You're equating AGI as like this intellectual property kind of like thing, which can be replicated at will, etc. Right? I think of AGI more like AGI is not actually AGI, or like the oil equivalent over here is data, right? Where someone randomly first kind of like showed up and like tried something and like hit the ground on with like common crawl basically. They were like, shucks, these models do kind of fun things. And now everyone goes around, everyone's got like data sitting around in different places. Certain, like, I don't think each token is equally valuable. And thus, different people will find different utility for the data sets that they have access to. And so you can consider like kind of someone finding a massive oil well in their backyard when they realize that some of the data that they have sitting inside there is very, very valuable, right, for these kinds of models, which they have unknowingly been collecting for a very long period of time simply because they wanted it for like uh,
No,
governance
so
or
my
for
point
like
there,
just compliance.
but even in that situation, there's only again only like a handful of players who actually have been collecting that data, accidentally or not, in the world, right? Like there's
Yeah.
no
Oh, so
world that
Who do you
like
think are
no,
the
I
biggest?
think yeah.
commoditized that you can like find it. Sorry, go ahead. Good.
And no, I was just asking, like, who do you think are the people who have very unique, highly valuable data? It feels like outside of like Google and like the hyperscalers, I think we understand all that, but it feels like Twitter does, like Twitter is like all like Twitter does. I think Reddit does. Who else? Who else do you both believe have has like this highly valuable, super differentiated data at scale?
Chegg.
Yeah.
Chegg has the gold
Not
mine
check again.
of fractional data.
No,
But
but I, I
I mean,
think I think the I think the
good.
no, I was just going to say, I think that there is a premise in that question which I think has to be questioned, which is that you're assuming online companies have most of the data. I think so much of the world is offline. So much of the world is
Yeah.
sitting in random documents in different places. And if I just like hop into healthcare for a second, right? One of the things that we always used to talk about when we were kind of like at the start of VLR, and we found has been very useful, is that just because of compliance reasons, for example, right? Patient samples, certain kinds of patient data needs to be stored for at least 10 years, 20 years, and that's set up across every hospital, at least in the U.S. Probably exists, across a lot of different countries, right? And so this is so that's a good example that of something that I would give where it's like kind of an untapped oil well, right? Where you can just go in. No one currently prices the value of that data at all, right? And a lot of folks, and of course, healthcare data has so many different concerns associated with it. But leaving that aside, it is definitely something that um, you know could be analogous to an oil well, right? For
No, but
for
you.
for 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 those for that kind of company.
I mean, if we stick with your analogy that like or your belief that not every token is created equal in terms of how valuable it is to AGI, right? Like it's not
Yeah,
apparent to me that a training on like patient healthcare data is particularly valuable for building general intelligence, right? Like maybe
But
completely agree.
domain
but
specific intelligence is narrow intelligence, sure, right? But general intelligence,
Yeah,
not
I
up.
but also
completely
do
agree. But
you not?
I go on,
No, I was
finish
just
it.
gonna say like this is also like we don't know what we don't know because we haven't done it yet,
Exactly,
right? Like
exactly.
I think what excites me most about that statement is that is truly something that like I don't see enough people talk about, or potentially like outside of like I can probably count the number of people on my hand who hands who have like actually spoken about like the digitization and like physical like a real world data that like is not like just in the digital world, and which is why like all these web scraping startups have like have really popped up, and why we as and I think the three of us have also spoken about how like OpenAI and others have to solve the web scraping problem, but like who's going to solve the real world data problem? And that is this huge unlock, and I'm sure like and I'm sure many people outside of the largest companies are potentially thinking about that and saying, hey, like this could be our wedge to do something super differentiated versus like just scraping the web again and again and trying to compete with OpenAI on that because competition is for losers, right?
What's interesting to me is that it seems in some regards that Google has been surprisingly prescient on this. Google Books, right? It's like this huge archive
Yep.
of a lot of digitized data, and it's not obvious to me, whether the data problem is the reason that they did all this digitization. It seems more likely that it's merely in organizing and making useful the world's information. And again, so you come back to the point that there's only like a small handful of real companies that seriously have the scale and compute and have built up, that have stumbled across, tens of thousands of oil wells, right?
I,
you
I
can't
I
you can't
agree. And
Standard Oil. Like, my view is you can't start Standard Oil unless you at least begin by controlling some non-trivial amount of oil wells. You can't start from zero. You can't decide I'm going to build a monopoly and say, oh no, dude, like I have no oil wells in my backyard, but I'm going to convince 5,000 other people to let me buy their land. Unless you have capital of some kind.
But I also think you don't have to be OpenAI. I think you could be a smaller player who has some amount of capital and can take that to go convince a bunch of other people who have like quote unquote these oil wells to go use that data, given like the amount of money that I think the three of us would agree on this, that is getting poured into high quality data and differentiated data, which is kind of the premise for a lot of companies that are trying to build foundation models, also fine tune models. I think even digitizing data from a cost perspective might make more sense than like some of the data labeling and some of the data tools that we're seeing right now.
yeah, we just get everyone to like put cameras in a bunch of different places for any of these different companies, and that's kind of it, you know. Just get them hooked up with cameras and get that to like pump all the video to S3, and then at some point
GPT-4o.
within the next 5 years,
GPT-4o.
it's exactly GPT-4o. Suddenly, it's doing some beautiful stuff for you, right? And like if GPT 3.5 to 4 is like 10x it's like what 10x cheaper, right? Or
Oh,
like
it's free.
it's half the price or something like that.
Oh, it's free,
Three
dude.
to Yeah, I don't know. It's just like it gets so much cheaper so quickly right now, right? So I don't even think this is like a problem to solve per se, right? Just store as much as you can, and then the models will come.
Okay, awesome. I think that is a great ending point that the models will come. So thank you so much everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Awesome.